Now we're going to talk about layout mode, which is the mode where you can set up your virtual rig and workspace. In this video, we'll talk about the panel, shelved, and group controls. In the follow-up video, we'll set up the graphical user interface to mimic our hardware. The first thing I'm going to do is go to keyboard and then choose this basic keyboard template. Now that I'm in here, I'm going to click on layout, and this will bring me over to the layout menu. And next, I'm just going to highlight and delete all the pre-configured controls on the screen. Now, I like to refer to this section as the canvas. It's the main area where we can add and rearrange on-screen controls. Now, until we do that, it's just a blank slate. Over here, we have the Screen Control Inspector. We'll talk about that more in the next video when we start to build our rig, but you should know that this is the area where you link up MIDI assignments to your hardware. Down here, we have the Screen Controls palette. This holds all the available controls that make up the graphical interface. The Screen Controls palette is made up of the panel controls, shelved controls, grouped controls, and then we have all controls. Let's talk about the difference between panel controls and shelf controls first. Now, panel controls operate in a two-dimensional plane, while shelf controls operate in a three-dimensional plane. If I drag these two different knobs here, you can see that there's a resizing box around them, and I also get a grid, and it's actually really easy to link the two up side by side. If I grab a shelf control, I now have these two white lines, which is our shelf, and the graphic is also in 3 dimensions, so if I grab this here, we can see we have a 3-dimensional layer. Now if I try and link up shelf controls and panel controls together, you can see that it doesn't really work out. We don't really have any grid or any lines to do that. So let's talk about the contents of the panel controls first. The first thing we have in the panel controls is the smart controls. This is going to automatically create an interface for some of the Apple virtual instruments, like RetroSynth, Vintage B3, Vintage Clav, and Vintage Electric Piano. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that in here, and then I'm going to go over to the Edit menu and select a patch. You can see when I did that, it populated the correct interface for us. It kind of gives us a quick glance at the plugin and also the settings for it. Next is the MIDI activity light, and this will light up when we're receiving MIDI input. After that, we have the round and directional knobs. They're basically the same thing with a slightly different graphic. When you assign these to your hardware, you'll have the graphic and lights to show the positioning, and you can also have a numerical value as well. It's also the same deal with the vertical and horizontal fader. When we put these on the screen, they'll show lights and a graphic for the position of your control and a numerical value. Next, we have button, and that will light up when engaged and show us a numerical value as well. After that, we have a drum pad, and this will brighten or dim with velocity. Now, the vertical, horizontal, and VU meter are all graphics that can be used to display output. Ironically, you can also repurpose those to represent data, like the position of a fader. I'll show you how that's done in the next video. Well, what if we don't want a knob or a fader, and we just want a numerical MIDI value? That's what parameter text is for. Now, you'd think that organ drawbar would be self-explanatory, but it's actually not. So don't go throwing this in your interface and assume it's going to automatically display drawbar registrations, because it won't. The graphic is identical in function to knobs and faders. More on that in the following video. Moving on, we have progress indicator and waveform, and they're both used in the playback plugin to display where we are in the process of playback. We'll explore these more in the playback plugin segment of the series. After that, we have selector, and this will show us an overview of our sets and patches contained within them. After that, we have text, and we can use this to display lyrics, but I mostly use it for chord changes. I've also found it helpful to put reminders in here. Rounding off the panel controls, we have background. You can set up different backgrounds for your controls and then give those backgrounds a specific color, theme, or texture. You can even set the background to your own image if you want. Let's move on over to shelf controls. First up is keyboard. This will act as an advanced MIDI activity light. It's going to show you the keys that you're playing, and it will also display how many layers you have active in your patch. Next up is the mod and pitch wheel, and this can be used to display the position of your modulation and pitch wheel. If you're using a joystick-based control, you're kind of out of luck as far as making it look authentic, but you can still use these controls. The last three are sustain, foot pedal, and foot switch. Sustain will show you the position of damper pedal with a MIDI light. You can use foot pedal to display expression or continuous controller messages. Foot switch can be used for engaging or disengaging effects like Leslie or chorus. Now let's check out the group controls. Now, the group controls are basically taking anything from the panel and shelf controls and grouping them into commonly used configurations. We can get things here like 8 directional knobs, 9 organ drawbars, 8 vertical meters, VU meters. We can also get pre-configured keyboards. So I just dragged this 61-note keyboard over here, and you can see that we have a keyboard with pitch and modulation, and we also have keyboard layers as well. Now, one of the unique ones in here are these stomp box controls. Stomp box controls are pretty cool. If I drag this last one over here, you can see that it's a group of 4 directional knobs with their values. We also have a place to name the pedal, and a foot switch, and it even has a background already pre-configured for us. Wrapping up our controls section, we have the simplest one of all, which is all controls, and this is just all the controls from the panel, shelf, and grouped controls. So that wraps up our part 1 video of the layout menu. Be sure to check out the next part where we start building a rig. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.